Welcome. I'm Andrew Fazakis, the Night Sky Guy, here for Astronomers Without Borders. Welcome to everyone around the world joining us for another celebration of Global Astronomy Month. This is the 14th annual edition of this celebration, the largest astronomy festival of its kind, and we love for you to join us. This is a lineup that's entire month long of amazing programming, both international and at the local level as well. And we invite you to take a look at our Global Astronomy Month calendar that's online. You can find it at gam-awb.org. That's gam-awb.org. Now, if you're not familiar with Astronomers Without Borders, well, we're here to do good using astronomy. We've spread STEM education resources around the world and all over, from telescopes to eclipse glasses. We've been all over the world, from Australia to Ethiopia to Argentina, wherever there's a need for educators that need resources, we're there. We also bring amateur astronomy clubs around the world together. We're in 143 different countries with over 12,000 members. And we've got this amazing platform online. We invite you to take a look, where we provide a community, building a community of amateur astronomers, people who do outreach, educators around the world. So come on by, take a look, join up. It's for free, and join the discussion of amateur astronomy and the love of the night sky. Now, Global Astronomy Month, as I've said, is filled with lots of amazing things. Throughout, we do observational events, star parties, we do live streams using robotic telescopes, and there's some coming up this week. Don't forget, this Saturday coming up is going to be the peak of the Lyrid meteor shower, this annual shooting star show, and we'll have a live stream directly from China from our national coordinator, Jeff Dai, who's going to be out in a really remote area in China, showing a beautiful live viewing of those shooting stars. And so you're welcome to drop by. Stay tuned for all the details on our website, astronomerswithoutborders.org. So make sure you check that out. So today we've got another amazing show for you about something special, something that you may not have heard about too much, is neurodiversity. And this is a topic that is being discussed in many locations. You may have heard it on the news. Maybe you've been touched by neurodiversity, something that you've heard people talk about. Neurodiversity is something that is new to me, I think new to a lot of people, and we are here at AWB to kind of shed light on some new interesting topics, and neurodiversity is just one of them. And I'm really excited to have my guests join me today. We've got three very special guests here. Whoops, there we go. Three very special guests joining me, and hi to everyone. Thanks for being here. I've got to my right, I've got Professor Lynn Cominsky from Sonoma State University, and she's been involved in STEM learning and in establishing the NASA's Neurodiversity Network, which we'll be learning a lot about today. I'm really excited. We're also joined just underneath me. We've got Dr. Ariana Riccio. She's the Senior Research Associate at the Education Development Center. Her work focuses on curriculum development, maker education, transitions to employment and higher education for autistic adolescents and young adults. And then finally, we're also joined by Sam Tumolo. She's a senior maker space coordinator at the New York Hall of Science. And Sam develops inclusive STEM programs for learners of all ages with a focus on increasing visitor agency through universal design for learning. So we're going to learn a lot about so many things here about neurodivergency, neurodiversity. I'm really excited. Thanks for all of you to join me here today. Lynn, maybe you can start us off a little bit here on explaining a little bit of a background for those of us who are not familiar with the term neurodiversity.
Thanks, Andrew. I'd be glad to if we can bring up our slides.
Sure thing. There we go.
Okay, so we're here today to tell you about neurodiversity and NASA's Neurodiversity Network. Next slide, please. So we've already been introduced, so we can just keep moving on. Next slide, please. So this is what we're going to be talking to you about today. I will tell you about NASA's Neurodiversity Network, which we call N3. I'll tell you about the N3 project and our summer high school internship program for autistic teens. Then you'll be getting an introduction to neurodiversity and more information about getting to know your neurodiverse community. We'll give you some practical tips to support neurodiverse and autistic learners. And then we'll have some reflection and wrap up and hopefully time for some questions. Next slide, please. So NASA's Neurodiversity Network is part of the Science Activation Program that has something like 50 different teams of people working together to do education in space science and other earth science, helioscience, and planetary science. So each program has its own goals and outcomes. So if we can have the next slide. How did I get started in neurodiversity work? So I'm a professor of physics and astronomy at a primarily undergraduate university. And about 8 years ago, I was fortunate enough to meet Alex Vasquez when his mom brought him to Sonoma State. He was 18 at that time and had just transitioned from homeschooling to being enrolled in our local community college. And his mom said, "Here's my brilliant son. He's autistic. He really loves astronomy. Can you get him some astronomy to do?" So we got him involved in observing with our remote telescope, which is named GORT. The next summer, he came back as part of the Rising Data program, which is another program I was running to build rockets and drones with community college students. And so he helped us with that program. He also engaged in various NASA community college programs while he was at the Santa Rosa Junior College. And then a couple years after I first met him, he transferred to Sonoma State and became a physics major. He was our first CalBridge Scholar, which is a program that supports first-gen and underrepresented students to try to get them to go to grad school in physics or astronomy. Through CalBridge, he was able to do summer research at UC Berkeley in person and then at Penn State during the pandemic remotely. And at Sonoma State, he worked on developing the CAD drawings for our second CubeSat, which was named EdgeCube, and he worked on sensor development for that program. Alex is now in the graduate program in physics and material science at UC Irvine and just won an NSF graduate research fellowship. Only my second student in 27 years of teaching at Sonoma State University to have won one of those. And SSU stands for Sonoma State University. So from my 8 years of working with Alex, I concluded that long-term mentoring of students on the autism spectrum was key to his success because he's just done spectacularly well, and I'm so proud of him. Most people that get into autism advocacy, it's because they have a child or a close relative that has been diagnosed as on the spectrum. But in my case, it was all because of Alex, because he's truly an inspirational figure, and I'm just so happy that I got to meet him. And it's more surprises and more wonder is happening every day that since I started the N3 program. Can I have the next slide, please? So here are the goals for the N3 program. It's a 5-year program at present, so we're sort of in the smack dab in the middle of it right now. Our goal is to provide a pathway to NASA participation in STEM employment for neurodiverse learners with the focus on those on the autism spectrum. It turns out that students on the autism spectrum are significantly underserved, and so we have several different things that we are doing to help this population. We are co-developing existing NASA resources with focus groups, including autistic learners and their teachers. We are providing authentic NASA experiences to try to improve the scientific literacy for this population. And we have our summer high school internship program where we take in applications from across the country. This year we got over 200, and we chose 20 students to participate as summer high school interns. We then match these students up with NASA subject matter experts in their particular area of interest, and they do amazing projects all summer long and present the results of the projects at the end of the summer. Next slide, please. Our entire N3 program is based on the principles from the autism self-advocacy movement, which is nothing for us or about us without us. So we include autistic people in the development of everything that we do. The co-development process uses autistic learners and their special teachers that have training in special education. And the internship program, we also get lots of input from autistic youth and young adults, as well as our former interns and the next generation of interns. Next slide, please. So this is what we've done so far. In 2021, our first year, it was still very heavily COVID impacted. We worked on a suite of activities to do remote astronomy, and that uses our telescope GORT, which is shown here in the image on the left. We added a lot of really fun activities and tutorials to our Astronomy from Home website. And we created a learning pathway that starts with image analysis using the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory's 5-inch telescopes called Micro Observatory. People can then, when they've been through that training, learn how to submit their own telescope requests to use our 14-inch telescope GORT, which can be remotely operated. This last year, we worked on redoing the Rising Data Model Rocketry and Payload Development Program. This was originally developed for underrepresented minority community college students, but we were trying to build these rockets and payloads with high school students, as well as in summer camps with middle school students who were on the autism spectrum. Next slide, please. So this year, we are working on heliophysics activities that include building a sun spotter, which you can see a picture of the prototype on the left, and getting everybody ready to observe either the annular eclipses in 2023, that's October of this year, or the total solar eclipse that will go through a different part of the country in 2024. The paths of both of these eclipses are shown in the figure on the right on this slide. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our internship program. Next slide, please. So for the internship program, we're working with high school students, mostly rising seniors, so students that are in the summer between their junior and senior years of high school, although we do have a couple of rising juniors and a couple of people who are on their way to college already. The summer interns are required to complete at least 160 hours, which is 1 month of full-time work over a 3-month period. And the mentors meet remotely with their interns at least once a week. At the end of the summer, when the interns present their final projects, they're paid a $1,000 stipend and the mentors are paid a $2,000 stipend. The really fun part, and I'm still in the middle of it for this year, is to find subject matter experts from all the different areas covered by NASA's Science Mission Directorate to pair up with the chosen interns so that they can supervise a research project in an area that's of special interest to the intern. The application for the internships for 2023 is now closed. We have notified all of the selected candidates. We'll reopen in January 2024 for next summer, and you can see more about the internship program at the link at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. However, I am still looking for a couple of astronomers to be mentors. You have to have worked with NASA data or have been paid by a NASA project in the past, But if you're interested in mentoring an intern for this next summer, and you are an astronomer with a PhD that can share in your research with a really amazing student, please send me an email. And somebody will put my email in the chat, I'm sure. If you know an autistic high school student, watch our website. The 2024 applications will open in January of 2024. Also, if you want to see more of the activities that we've been redeveloping, you can go to our Astronomy from Home website and check out the resources that are there, or watch our videos on the N3 website from scientific talks at our monthly intern meetings, and also how-to videos to do some of our projects. Or you could volunteer to share your science at one of our monthly intern meetings. These are all ways to get involved with the N3 project if you are interested. Next slide, please. This is just the recruiting flyer for finding more mentors. There's my email address on there. I will see if I can put it in the chat myself here as soon as I figure out how to stop talking and type something. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm pleased to turn this over to my colleagues, Ariana and Sam, and they will continue to tell you more about what neurodiversity really is and best practices for working with neurodivergent learners.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm thrilled to be joining this group today, and I'm hoping that we can provide some new tools and information to help you connect with the neurodiverse folks in your own communities. So Sam and I will be kind of tag teaming through the next few sections of our talk. Alrighty. There we go. All right, so the first thing we should do is really define what we mean when we say neurodiversity. And very simply put, neurodiversity is a term that just describes the natural diversity across all humans and emphasizes that there's no one normal type of brain, but rather that the neurodiversity movement reminds us that rejecting this type of diversity from the norm is, a socially constructed form of power dynamics that can lead to inequality and inaccessibility for those who don't conform to the normal. Really what we're saying is there is no normal and all of our brains are different. Sam, are you there?
Is my volume working?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. All right, there we go. Sorry, for some reason my volume was off. All right, so neurodiversity is an umbrella, and there are multiple different sorts of types of neurodiversity. There's also a lot of overlap. These are some of the more common ones. And with all of these, there's comorbidities throughout, and it's really just an umbrella term.
Sam, I don't think your microphone is working that well.
It sounds very bubbly, like you're underwater.
Okay. Let me try a different mic. How about this? Does that sound any better?
Not really.
All right. I don't know what that is. Ariana, do you want to tap in?
Sure. So I think Sam was just mentioning that the umbrella term of neurodiversity kind of encapsulates or covers all of these different types of neurodivergence. Our group primarily works with folks on the autism spectrum, so we'll be focusing on that area today. But here are some other types of neurodiversity or neurodivergences you may have heard of.
How about now?
Sam, let me know. Oh, that sounds good.
Okay. Sorry. So this is a really cool project. It's called Project Astro Access. I think it really paints a cool picture of like the benefits of diversity and how people with disabilities can really contribute to the field of STEM and especially space. And the tagline for this organization is, if we can make space accessible, we can make any space accessible. And what they're doing is essentially sending people with physical disabilities in these parabolic flights and researching how the benefits and all sorts of different research projects around bringing disabled people into space and what that's going to look like. And there's a lot of advantages to that. Some of the things they're seeing is that those people who are deaf are really resistant to motion sickness and can adapt well to foreign gravitational environments. They're seeing that if you're on a flight and let's say power goes out or there's smoke, people who are blind are really able to navigate that quickly and can problem solve a lot faster than somebody who is sighted and accommodating to being in an environment where they can't see or there is smoke. So it's a really cool project. There's actually a Radiolab episode on it. I recommend watching the videos and hearing more about it. And that really ties into what we're doing and really just proving that people with diverse minds and diverse bodies can really, really contribute to STEM in a unique way. And if we can go to the next slide.
Great. So the next few slides, I'm just going to mention some terms around language, let's say functionality or support needs, and identity first language. So here I have a note that I'm really following the lead of autistic self-advocates here when I speak about these terms and conventions. I myself don't identify as autistic, but I'm really following the lead of my team members who do. So here we have a quote that is often credited with kicking off the autism acceptance movement, where Jim Sinclair states that autism is a way of being that can't be separated from the person. And we should embrace this as part of our identity and not something that should be fixed or cured. So in the bottom corner here, you can see I've crossed out the puzzle piece. And autistic self-advocates have really been advocating in recent years that we stop using this symbol to symbolize autism, because it really, symbolizes that autism is something that can be removed from the person and that autistic people have a missing piece that we need to fill in or fix or try to understand. And we should really embrace that there's nothing missing from the autistic person, and we should accept them for who they are and for their strengths and for their challenges. So similarly, I'm going to make a note about language. There's nothing wrong with using any other type of language, especially if you speak to autistic folks you work with and they prefer a different type of terminology. That should always be what you default to, is working with the individuals in your community and using the language that they prefer. And throughout, I will be using identity first language because the folks I work with tell me that that is what they usually prefer. So just speak to the groups you're working with to make sure you're using the most respectful choice for them. And then finally, I wanted to briefly chat about labels that have been used in the past to describe the strengths and the challenges of autistic people. And these often include language like high functioning and low functioning. And in the past, this kind of defaulted to those who do and do not use speech to communicate, or making a notation about someone's cognitive or academic abilities. But what we really understand now is that these functioning labels are really imprecise. Someone could need more support in some areas and a lot less support in another area. So by saying high functioning, we really don't know anything about that person, and we should use more specific labels about needs rather than functioning that's a lot less stigmatizing. So I won't be using those terms, and I would urge you to find another way to talk about those that you're working with.
So yeah, to echo off Ariana, there's nothing missing in anybody that is neurodivergent. I myself am neurodivergent, and it's not that there's something missing, it's that our society, our school system is designed for typical people. And if we can go back to the slides for a second, there are a lot of advantages to being neurodivergent. There these are some of the sort of things that you'll see along the spectrum. And a lot of these are strengths. A lot of these can be challenges in a neurotypical society. But again, it's a really wide spectrum of what makes a neurodivergent individual, and everybody is different, and everybody exists at different levels in these different categories. And we can go to the next slide.
Awesome. So now I'm going to chat a bit more about some characteristics or common strengths and challenges that we might see in neurodiverse community members in 3 different areas. So the first area I'll chat about are social and communication differences. So I've listed a few things here, but on all the slides I'm about to present, I just really want to highlight that every autistic person and every neurodivergent person is different. And this list is not inclusive, and it doesn't mean that someone on the spectrum really exhibits any of these particular things. So just some of the differences I've highlighted here are some difficulty reading emotions or body language, maybe laughing at unexpected points in a conversation, using different facial expressions or speech tone and variation. I've worked with some autistic folks who are very honest and some who use very literal language. Due to really intense interests that a lot of autistic folks have, they may talk for longer than expected about their topic of interest. They may not like physical contact or to make eye contact when they're speaking. They may need extra time to respond to a prompt in spoken conversation or written conversation. And they may have some motor difficulties that impact their handwriting and their speech. I've also written some challenges and strengths associated with approaches to learning. We work with students and we run programs for high schoolers and middle schoolers. So this is particularly important for our team to remember. There are some executive functioning challenges like planning and organizing that might be difficult for folks on the spectrum. They may have a repetitive focus on the same activity. We might react more intensely to changes in our environment or our schedule. Might have difficulty generalizing skills across different areas. For example, going to summer camp or going to class. They might have trouble moving between those spaces. And a lot of autistic people are quite interested in rules. Some strengths. The ability to focus very intensely on these interests. So I have a little cartoon here of someone working on, let's say, a paper or an assignment from morning all the way until night, kind of going straight through the day. And we see that intense ability to hyperfocus in a lot of the folks that we work with. So strong memory for facts or dates, the ability to recognize patterns, attention to detail. And us 3 presenters in prepping for this talk, Sam, Lynn, and I, all resonated with the need to kind of multitask in order to focus our best. So wearing headphones while working or doodling or kind of having something off on the side while we're completing our main task. It might seem counterintuitive, but it helps us get the job done. And I'll highlight again. Oh, yes, please do.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that on that list of strengths, you'll probably notice that a lot of those are things that are really, really valuable in STEM careers and STEM disciplines. And as long as we can sort of create jobs where those challenges are accommodated and those are things that are more normalized, we can really improve the STEM field by bringing in neurodivergent minds and making that a safe place where needs are met and it's more normalized, the things that often could be considered stigmatizing in career settings.
Yeah, that's an amazing point, Sam. I'm glad you said that.
Okay, so some of the other things that we wanted to talk about were sensory differences. This is a big challenge for a lot of people on the spectrum or a lot of people that are neurodivergent somewhere. And so how I like to think about this is like, imagine how you hear sound, imagine how you experience light in a space, how you smell things, how you feel things, and then turn the volume either up a ton or down a ton. And that is sort of what it's like to have a sensory difference. A lot of autistic people will walk into a space and what feels like a normal volume will feel really loud and overwhelming, or a smell will be so distracting that you can't focus. And being able to, provide ways to accommodate that is also important. I work at the New York Hall of Science, and we recently came up with these sensory backpacks for our guests that they can rent for the day, and they have protective headphones, sunglasses. Certain parts of the museum are super loud, certain parts are really bright, and these are just ways that we can normalize that experience and still be an inclusive space. And at the same time, sometimes there are autistic people where they have lower sensory hyposensitivity. So if there's too much sensory input, if there's not enough, they need to seek it out. And that can manifest as stimming or like biting objects, picking at your nails, moving around. And then there's ways to address that as well. Like fidget spinners, as seen here, are a great way to increase sensory stuff. Ariana, did you want to add anything to this?
I think you've really covered it.
Cool. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, there's a bit of a lag when I hit the next slide button, unfortunately. So the final thing I wanted to highlight is kind of a stigma buster, if you will. In the past, autistic people were described as lacking cognitive empathy or understanding other people's thoughts, feelings, and intentions. But in reality, we've learned over the last 10 years, work by researcher Damian Milton in particular, coined the phrase the double empathy problem, which refers to the bidirectional challenges that folks with different neurotypes experience. So an autistic person and a non-autistic person, for example, having a conversation, have much more trouble understanding one another than two autistic people in a communication pair and two non-autistic people. And this onus is usually placed on the autistic person to change their communication style or to try and fit in and become more normal. Whereas we should all be trying a lot harder to understand each other's brains and ways of being. So we're trying to, play a leading role here in inviting autistic people to the table to understand how they learn best and how they think best, and to be flexible in how we provide opportunities to our students. Alrighty. So moving right along to practical strategies or best practices to support autistic or neurodiverse learners who you might encounter if you run events in the community, whatever your specialty may be. So we have 4 strategies that we're going to go over today. But we have a disclaimer first. I'll pass it to Sam.
Yeah. So kind of like what we mentioned earlier, nothing for us without us. Every autistic person is different, and it's important, especially if you're working long-term with somebody, to kind of check in with them about what sort of supports they're interested in. Everyone's different, and it's good to have different supports available, but not everyone's going to need every support, and it's really a one-on-one basis. So if possible, definitely talk to the person you're going to be working with and see what works for them, what's worked for them in the past, and then build a plan from there. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so a big thing is providing visuals to support something. Pairing visual and verbal information can increase how people are able to process, connect, and retain this information. So images is a big one, labeled images, and this benefits everybody. This isn't just something that benefits neurotypical people, and that is what I think is something important too. Like providing supports really just benefits everybody. Another thing we'll do, like if you're a teacher, I don't know if anyone here is an educator, but a big one is visual guides. So if you're explaining a process for how to do something, you would have like, first do this and then have an image of it. Second, do this, have an image of it. And that's a really good way, especially if people struggle with retaining information verbally. That's a really good way that they can still access that content, and it's more accessible and inclusive. But if you're not in the classroom, again, like diagrams, images, printouts, that kind of stuff is really, really helpful. We can go to the next slide. So another one is priming. Priming helps to ease anticipation for what's going to happen, and helps people get ready to focus. So this could be something that you send out in advance before a program. Maybe it's an agenda, maybe it's an overview of what to expect. Something that's really popular in museums right now is called a social narrative, and it's visual and image and steps explaining like what's going to happen. Like, this is where you walk in, this is what you'll see, this is who will be standing here, this is what you can do, this is where you can go. And it really just eases that anxiety and explains what's going to happen and lets people relax into a new environment, especially if somebody struggles with entering a new space for the first time. Did anyone want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it. It's really just letting folks know what's going to come next so that they can be prepared for any change that might happen in the environment. All right, I'm going to chat about embedding interests into your programming. And I wanted to include this strategy, but it's often not a problem for us, for folks who work in astronomy or science. We're often welcoming folks into a museum or hosting a special curriculum about space or rockets. And that is often a key interest of our folks already, and that's why they're coming to the program. But it is really important to set aside time to learn about the specific interests that people might have who are coming to programs that you're hosting. Like, folks might love a particular star or planet, or methodology or technology that you can then work into your presentation. And that often makes it very special and relatable, and more interesting for them to take the information back home with them. Final strategy here.
Oh. So establishing clear expectations is something that's really important, and just keeping things like, if there is a goal, just making sure that goal is easily understood and explained with explicit clarity and detail, especially if you're going from one activity to another. And sorry, do you mind putting the slide back? And just making sure that that sort of expectation is something that is explicit, and that can be something that is written down, something that is reemphasized throughout, and that kind of prevents the nuance of not really knowing what the goal is of some sort of activity or learning experience.
Yeah, and I would also highlight that, let's say we're in a museum or we're hosting a summer camp, it's really important to set up upfront what the expectations are for, communicating in that space, working in that space. Is it okay to get up and walk around and do your activity anywhere in the room? Or are you expected to kind of sit at your table for a certain amount of time? And setting that clear expectation for how the space functions can be really helpful to make your program run more smoothly for everybody who attends.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. And then we're ready here to wrap it up. So for the folks who are joining us live, I was hoping that in the chat, if you had any reflections, something that you learned today or something that you unlearned, and kind of changed your perspective on, I'd love to hear your response in the chat. We can skip the waterfall part, since I'm sure most people will actually watch the recording of this. So when you're ready to share a reflection, if you have something you'd like to share with the group, you can just go ahead and type it in the chat. And I'll leave us there with a question slide with our contact information, in case you have any thoughts. If you want to reach out to us and get involved, you can find the three of us here. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that. Yes, we're open for questions. If anyone's who's watching live, just put it into the comment section. But yeah, I mean, there's like so much stuff there to unpack that you have presented. And my background, and I think a lot of folks at the Astronomers Without Borders community, they do informal outreach, informal education. Outreach events, specifically in terms of like star parties, for instance. So I'm kind of I've been, as an amateur astronomer, kind of thinking, okay, yeah, like how would we, adjust things? What would we adjust? And the things that are most common, I think, is, there's going to be like a bunch of telescopes out on a field, and then we come out and see like a conjunction, the moon and Jupiter, and get to see it up close. How would you guys? I mean, you guys were talking about like things like I were taking note, like sensory differences are big. When you have large crowds like that, there's an electric buzz that practically happens when, especially if it's something magical, if it was like a meteor shower, and there's a lot of energy in large crowds that happen at star parties. How do you deal with that? What kind of tips do you have for organizers of star parties like that they should maybe take note of?
Yeah, I can get started, and you guys can interrupt me if I don't think of something. But I have a few ideas. First would be in your promotional materials up front to tell people what to expect. So you can write, we will have a field with 20 telescopes, and folks can choose which telescope they'd like to look into, be prepared for a large crowd of about X number of people, and then they can make a decision on whether that's a space that they want to interact in or not. We've often had kind of something off to the side for folks who don't want to have a big sensory experience. So if you can have maybe a separate area where someone could use a telescope on their own, that might be nice. But I'm sure we've all seen folks who love the electric buzz of a crowd around their interest, but we've also seen folks who find that overwhelming. So it could really go either way.
Yeah, I would suggest that idea too of having a space sort of to the side, and maybe even on the flyer or somewhere at the entrance, writing something like, this can be a very crowded space. If you would prefer a one-on-one distanced encounter, like find somebody in X t-shirt and, talk to them about that. And I think that is definitely a capacity thing too. Like, I don't know how many people you're going to have staffing that, so that might be hard to enforce. But again, just like on your promotional materials, explaining that this is crowded. Maybe even purchasing, if you have the capacity, some over-ear headphones. That can be helpful for a lot of people. That sort of just mutes the general sounds in a crowded space. We've done that a lot for like rocket launches, and a lot of our camp kids really benefited from that. Yeah, I agree about just making sure that is disclosed, and if possible, having that space to the side.
So that would be also part of the promotional, I guess, effort that you would be putting out.
Yeah.
Right?
So then when you're at the star party, the person who's running the organization can say, here's the special telescope that we put off to the side for people who would prefer to interact in a more quiet environment. Or we have these 10 telescopes, they're going to be looking at these 10 different things, right?
Yeah.
Just more clear instructions rather than just letting it be sort of, freewheeling, so that people that are hoping to learn what's really going on get that priming ahead of time. This telescope will be looking at Jupiter. This telescope will be looking at the Pleiades, whatever, just so that it's more clear what's really going on. And they don't have to fight with the crowd and stand in line at a telescope only to find out they're looking at something they're not interested in.
That's a great idea.
Right. I was going to mention clear labels on each area. So you're giving the verbal information at the beginning, but then when you go to a station, it's all labeled for you. So you don't have to retain all that information before you head off on your own.
That's very
interesting. And I think through placing that information about accessibility in the promotional flyer will sort of ping this as a safe space. I know in terms of museums, a lot of parents of kids with disabilities have mentioned that they avoid spaces like that out of stigma and out of just knowing this is going to be too much for my kid. So I think if you're acknowledging that, there's going to be more people who are like, oh, I could bring my child to this, and you're creating a more welcoming space.
Very interesting. And I am thinking also, that kind of leads me into the idea of a lot of times at these star parties where the telescopes are being manned by amateur astronomers, right? They're there doing the interpretation. Any any thoughts about like how you would do interpretation? Is there any difference in the approach of what the amateur astronomers who's at the telescope maybe describing what they're looking at, like usually it's like especially if it's like a nebula or a galaxy, it's something that maybe the general public are not that familiar with, understanding the differences of what these celestial objects are. So I'm just wondering in terms of the educational aspect of being at the telescope and describing these objects.
So if there's a way to accompany the description with something in a different modality, like a piece of paper with some stuff written down on it, it's hard to show videos when you're at a star party, but videos are definitely the thing that most of our learners should choose as their, additional channel of information. But that's not really going to work out in the middle of a field in the dark. So perhaps, a written summary with a picture, from Hubble or something of what it would look like if you were up in space with a telescope, or, and that it's not going to look like that through your eyepiece because you don't get to integrate the light for very long. But that's a technical detail. It's just that I know that a lot of star parties, people are really disappointed when the things you're looking at through the telescope don't look like the Hubble pictures. It's a pretty common phenomenon, right? Everybody expects it to look like the Hubble pictures, but it's not a camera, it's an eye. Eyes don't integrate light for as long as cameras do, so it's never going to look like that.
Yes, and I've seen a lot of amateurs using like tablets, tablets or their phones, smartphones.
Maybe
any thoughts on that devices?
That's great. Yeah, I think that's something that will light up in the dark. You can see that better. You can link to things. You can pull up like answers to questions and look stuff up, show images, show videos, maybe even like having QR codes that could connect to learning more information about this on your own time would be helpful. I think tablets is a great idea.
So visuals, like and I've also seen used like large screen TVs, flat screen TVs being set up like a station, and connected cameras to, I guess, to telescopes. That's something, because sometimes I've noticed that it could be a sensory overload. Like some of these larger telescopes, you have to actually climb a ladder or a step stool, especially, or if you're a youngster, they have to kind of be helped to look through a telescope, right? It involves picking up the child. I remember many times I said, "Oh, there's a little 6-year-old that I have to pick up to reach the eyepiece." I guess that's something that you'd have to also take into account, right? Because it's a sensor. Can you touch the child, or what do you do, in that case, reaching the eyepiece?
Yeah, or somebody who is in a wheelchair. There's like a lot of, I think having a screen and a camera, if that's something that you have the capacity for, like the technological capacity and financial capacity for, would make the experience very accessible.
Basically, the more different modalities you can present the information in, the better off the neurodivergent learners will be, right? So it's not just one thing, and it's not just one cure, for every different kind of disability. It's, try to do as many different things as you can, and that way, you're going to reach the largest audience.
And what's cool about it is, like, again, like that stuff that benefits everybody. If you have a screen there's a long line, people, are running late to something, they can just kind of look at that and still get the experience. And yeah, it just really, when you start thinking about things that benefit someone with a disability, it really ends up benefiting everybody.
I just wanted to plug that if this is something you don't have a ton of experience with, I'm sure that these 40 minutes were helpful, but it definitely doesn't cover everything. So I would urge you to welcome your community in and take their suggestions, because they're going to be able to tell you exactly what would help them the best.
Definitely. And I guess, I mean, this is going to be off on a little tangent, but I took note of this as well in your presentation. I thought this was very cool, is that neurodiverse folks may have an advantage in space travel. That's something interesting. Is this something new? Some new discovery that is being made?
This organization started in 2021, possibly. And they're doing all sorts of research projects around this. And there's a link to it in the slides, and I'll try and drop it in the chat too, but I don't think we have access.
We don't seem to be able to put things in the chat.
Yeah, just send us the links. We'll definitely put them out. But yeah, I mean, this is the idea of, you're mentioning that, like, space sickness, deaf people don't experience, and that's a very common thing in space. Right, it doesn't get talked a lot in the public eye, right? Astronauts going into space, it's very glamorous and it's so cool, but the fact is there's a large number that really do suffer from motion sickness. And then you're saying here that deaf people have this. That's a significant advantage potentially.
Yeah, and the same with low vision. And I forget who it was, but their spacesuit started fogging up, and just like getting used to that took a significant amount of time to solve the actual problem. When somebody who is used to that, if that happens, you're just going to be able to solve the problem a lot quicker. And like, first thing that happens a lot when there's like tech issues is the power goes out. Having somebody who can move swiftly through dark space is really advantageous if you have a limited amount of time to solve a problem. I would also really recommend listening to this Radiolab episode on this project. I will put that in the chat too. The episode is called The Right Stuff.
I like the sound of that. Very interesting. So yeah, I mean, do any of you know if NASA's taking this into account in terms of astronaut selection? The idea of neurodiversity?
Not at the present time. Right now, NASA's just working on trying to get people of different genders and races to the moon, and NASA has also just added DEIA, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, as a core value, an official NASA core value. So they're just getting started with enlarging their view to go beyond gender and race, which we're very excited about. And so we're hoping they'll get to neurodiversity, sooner rather than later. But as it is, the N3 project is really doing a good job of bringing this issue to the forefront of NASA's attention, and we are getting a lot of requests to give talks to different NASA groups to explain how to work better with neurodivergent teams and neurodiverse teams. So we're really happy about that.
I could imagine. So, Lynn, where would people go then for more information? Where would you?
Our main website, which you've put in the chat a few times already, n3.sonoma.edu. That would be the one.
This one here, right? So
that there. And if you want to learn more about the internship program, then you go to the internships link at the top. And we have videos, and we have other resources, both things we've developed and other programs people can look at to learn more about neurodiversity.
Excellent. So, my goodness. Okay, so a lot to learn. I think for our audience, this is going to be a lot of takeaways. If you're watching this recorded, please do share comments still on you. If you're watching it on YouTube or Facebook, please feel free to chime in. We'd love to hear how you would actually enable some of these tips and tricks in your activities. We'd love to hear how that, and of course, share it on our website. We've got the ability to share members reports and blogs, and I think there's a lot of really interesting tips that were shared today. It's making me think, as an amateur astronomer, of how I could go about changing my practice and being more inclusive in the way I would promote an outdoor, stargazing party or a presentation that's being done. Clubs around the world have this power of really drawing people, and why not do this? It just makes sense to be so inclusive, and it's not a difficult thing to do. It's a great way to actually start engaging people in general, I think. So thank you very much for all of your work and enlightening us today on this. Thank you very much. And I hope that we can have you back sometime in the future to give us a progress on where things are going with your projects, because it's really exciting. So thank you very much for joining us. And just before we go, remember everyone, it's Global Astronomy Month. We're still plenty of activities coming up. Take a look at our GAM calendar. It's gam-awb.org. That's the global calendar of astronomical events, and there's plenty more to come from. So stay tuned to that. And remember that AWB's motto is one people, one sky. So I hope all of you guys can share our collective heritage of the night sky that we have as humans. It's something beautiful. It's something that is easy to share. I thank you for joining us today. I'm Andrew Fizakis, the Night Sky Guy, here for Astronomers Without Borders. I hope you have a great day. Until the next time, clear skies.
From the pale blue dot to the distant stars, we are one. One people, one sky.